Tell me when
All
it's,
right, we
tell
are
me,
there.
yes.
It's
All
all
right.
good.
All right. We have started here. This is GMing 101, How to Be a Good Game Master. I am the moderator, D. Beadham. Let's see. I am retired librarian who has cats, like you've never heard that before. And
It's
I am
almost a trope.
no, it is a trope, but I didn't become this for that. And I am currently in my other running a Pulp Cthulhu campaign virtually. So, and Hunter is actually the player character of Steve Wall. Speak.
Hello. Hi, I'm Hunter Wall, Steve Wall's son, who was originally slated to be on the panel, but as he doesn't play role-playing games and I am a GM, I have been deputized in his place. So,
Paul. I'm sorry. Yep. Paul.
oh,
I'm Paul L. I write science fiction, fantasy, urban fantasy, role-playing games, and GM all the time. So I'm currently running 2 campaigns in my own new role-playing game in Sandbox World, and playing in 2 or 3 other games, and run games whenever I can. So, good.
Did I interrupt you, Hunter?
no, sorry, I
Okay.
I'm getting used to this whole Zoom thing.
Yeah. Stace.
Hi, I'm Stace Johnson, and I've been gaming since late '70s. Got into first edition D&D Blue Book at that point, but I've actually done more. I've definitely done some GMing, but I've done more as a player than I have anything else over the years, which I think will give me a different perspective from what you guys do, because you guys will have the perspective of what's it like to be the GM. I'll provide the perspective of what it's like to be a player in a good GM's campaign.
Chaz.
How's it going, guys? I'm Chaz Kemp. I am a local illustrator to the Denver area. I do illustrate a lot of fantasy, sci-fi, steampunk, cyberpunk. I've actually done some art for Paul Lell's game that he published, and that was a lot of fun. And I started playing D&D in the very early '80s. And it was so much fun. Then I moved to Colorado, and couldn't find too many people to play. And when I finally found a group, nobody else wanted to GM, so I was like, nah, I'll try it. And so I've actually been GMing since around the mid '80s in various games. I play as well, but I GM mostly. So.
Okay, we have a couple of questions that were given to us, but the one I'd like to bring right off now, because it might have some effect. There is what I consider normal, role-playing games, which is you do it with friends and it's a long-range campaign. And there's also convention where you are coming in, it's a one and done, total strangers, and you may be using a campaign setting that you have never heard of before, or in fact, maybe debuting. Do you think that is a significantly different kind of rules of the game? And do we want to talk even about convention playing?
Anybody? So I do a lot of like one-shot games when I go to Gen Con and Tacticon and some of the other local gaming conventions. It's usually stuff that I bring to the table or stuff that I've built rather than off-the-shelf games, but they are kind of off the shelf because I designed them specifically for conventions. I think the biggest change really is just that you have very little time to get to know the characters, and the players themselves tend to be, I guess, a little bit more daring and adventurous because they know there's no tomorrow, right? So it's a whole different energy for a game, but I think it's really cool because you run into a lot of different approaches to doing things and new situations that you don't see with a group that you're super familiar with and play with on a regular basis.
of the various questions, okay, let's see. I will start out with a couple of them. What tools do you use as a GM? You know,
This year or previously?
well, what you know, you know, it's you get to say anything, whatever you feel is actually interesting and what you want to bang the drum for. That's always true. We are not here to be fair. We are here to tell people things that we think are good.
All right. Well,
oh, go for it.
Chaz, please.
I think this could be good too if we kind of go around and kind of get everyone's perspective. But I'll start. You know, being a GM, I'm cool with starting. I think that one of the things that I improv a lot. And I think improvisation is really important as a GM because the players never actually go where you want them to go, like hardly ever. So you have to just kind of be good at being able to improvise. But I found recently that using really cool music is really neat to kind of set the atmosphere. So that's a tool I've been using fairly recently, and it's nice because it helps to get people into the mood a lot faster than just me going, all right, you see a room and here's everything in the room and blah 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 blah. The music really just kind of sets the tone, and then people are just in that mindset already. So that's a tool that I've used recently that I found is really neat.
I'd actually like to play off of that. I run a campaign in the Tales from the Loop role-playing game based off of the artwork of Simon Stollenhag. And one of the things that I find really helps sell the atmosphere of the game is not just the music, but also soundscapes. And to that end, I did a lot of research in trying to find the right tool for using soundscapes effectively and being able to switch between there and being able to respond to my players as they improv and go into places that I wasn't necessarily expecting. And the best tool that I found for this is a program called Sirenscape. It has a lot of configurable options. You can upload your own sounds to it if the ones that they give you by default aren't to your liking or to appropriate to your campaign. And they use a lot of they have two actual different programs, one for a sort of sci-fi setting and one for a fantasy setting. So if you've got like a cyberpunk or a D&D campaign, like you can use those different programs pretty effectively. And I found that really helps kind of bring that atmosphere to the table. Absolutely.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. As a player, one of the more recent campaigns that I was playing in was a Fate campaign, Fate rule system, but it was set up in a Firefly kind of universe, and so we wound up we actually all voted ahead of time as to what kind of music we wanted to do, and we did that for the previous couple of campaigns too, and then our GM kept it all available on a pad on his Android tablet and was able to just queue it up whenever he wanted to. It was really good. I enjoyed it a lot.
Nice.
Well, you're making me feel guilty because I could use all these tools and I use none of them. Because, well, for one thing, as I said, I'm currently running a virtual campaign called, Pulp Cthulhu, which is between the world wars, and it's actually in Earth. So I think one of my main tools now is Wikipedia, researching, because recently they were all sent off to Rotterdam, and I was trying to figure out what Rotterdam would look like in the 30s before it was bombed to hell. And I think instead of the atmosphere, it's the imagine that you really are here instead of sitting on your couch and just sort of cowering in your room or wandering around in the world. But that's a completely different flavor, I think. And Call of Cthulhu is supposed to be full of all eldritch horror, and people are terrified. And I am completely sidebarring that. And there's so many things that you have to be careful if you're all virtual, not to make it too fluffy. It has to be reasonably lean, or people will not be able to pick things up.
That's true. I think Paul still has to answer, I think, because I'm curious as to his tools. And that was not a sexual reference. I was just purely D&D, man.
When correctly viewed, everything is absurd.
This is a family show.
Right.
Sorry.
Yeah, so I use a bunch of tools. I love Sirenscape. With this year's sort of stay-at-home deal going on, I've had to adopt a lot of new tools. And I'm sure folks have heard of some virtual tabletop systems like Roll20. The one that I'm currently using for my new game and home-baked world is Fantasy Grounds, because it gives me a lot of flexibility to build new die rolls and things into the system. And there's other tools, World Anvil and similar, that they provide a virtual tabletop experience so everybody can be in the same place at the same time. Gives the GM a lot of different control, whether or not players just move their tokens or they have to propose where they're going to move them and the GM gets to approve it, so you can manage traps or whatever. A lot of these provide integration with Sirenscape, so you can actually get a plugin to allow Sirenscape sounds to be controlled from within the Fantasy Grounds interface, so you don't have to have a separate audio device or whatever hooked into your system with a board. Couple of questions coming up, people waving their hands.
Matthew, did you have a question for someone?
Yeah, so Becca L asks, how many of you do virtual campaigns now? And what tools do you use? Is that something you've already started answering?
To a certain degree, yeah, we're doing this, yes.
Okay.
I mean, actually, I use a Facebook group, and it is not as robust as Zoom by any means. And we occasionally are cursing. Yes, pull out your your headphones and put it back on. But on the other hand, it's free for more than 40 minutes.
Yeah, and Discord is another one that we use a lot. Like a lot of the people that I play with are already using Discord for other things, so it was sort of a natural extension for them to get into. So yeah, for interaction, we use Discord, sometimes with video, usually just audio because the video can be a little distracting. And then a virtual tabletop, pick your poison, Roll20, Fantasy Grounds, World Anvil, there's virtual tabletop simulator or whatever the other one, there's a bunch of them that are new now too, so.
Excuse me, Paul, you've told me these new things, but very, very fast. Could we hear a couple of these relatively slow with their full URLs?
Well, URLs may be difficult to enunciate, but I'll throw some stuff in chat.
I'll actually find the links.
There you go.
Post them.
Okay.
So Fantasy Grounds is the one that I use mostly with my campaign. Roll20.net is another one, and that one's free. Like if you don't want to spend a bunch of money, Roll20 is going to be the easiest way for everybody at the table to be able to play without spending any money. But the interface, the learning curve is there. There's a lot that you have to figure out. Fantasy Grounds, like I bought on a sale at Thanksgiving, like I got 50% off the lifetime Uber license. So with that expense, all of my players can just get the free demo version and log into my games, and there's no concerns. Otherwise, it's like $30 or $40 a person for everybody to have a license to be able to get together. And then the other one I know of for sure is World Anvil.
War Anvil?
World Anvil.
World Anvil.
Yeah. Astral, yeah, that just popped up from Chaz. And then if you're just looking for stuff to kind of do world building and create like your own sort of world Wikipedia, there's this awesome site that's called Chronica. And that's chronica.ventures, and they have some free stuff as well, but they also have some paid accounts that give you more capability. And this is where you can sort of like, people can build characters and keep track of their characters. You can have maps, you can build stores, you can track inventory, you can have organizations and track NPCs, and it's more of a sort of a collective journal experience that also provides all the players with their own private journal. and they can choose what they can share out to other people versus just the GM. So you can still have secret keeping and kind of behind the scenes stuff. And it's a really, really cool tool, even if you're playing at the same table, but it's also very helpful right now in today's virtual play state.
I also like to kind of play off of what you were talking about, Paul, with the kind of keeping track of all of the aspects of your world and players and NPCs and stuff like that. There was a program that I was using for a long time called RealmWorks, that also allows you to basically build out a entire Wikipedia type system with hyperlinks. So it'll automatically search every time you use the word, spell. Like it can, all you have to do is click on that and it'll refer to like what the definition of a spell is or whatever. But it's like been really helpful for at least tracking all of the parts of the worlds that I've built. But it's not free, and I think they just recently ended support for it. Not that it's not working anymore, but I don't think they're developing it any further. But I've rather enjoyed using it as far as it goes.
Yes.
Rel-
Let's see. There was a question that came up. Let's see, about how to handle the role playing aspect as somebody who felt they were good in the game, but I think that was play. I don't know if that was a player.
It was Nell, and they write, any advice for getting better at the role playing aspect. I do okay with mechanics, but struggle to turn an NPC's generic info dump into something interesting.
Oh, so it's a matter of trying to make the NPCs more interesting.
Yep, I can follow on that if nobody else wants it right away. Coming from a player perspective, I get what the question is how to act more like how to make the NPCs more varied and different from a GM perspective. But I saw somebody else respond about something about improv, and that works for that as well. Play off of what your players are telling you, and based on what they do, that can inform what kind of personality or what kind of actions and so forth that the NPCs will give.
Chaz?
Yeah, I used to be an actor, so the role playing aspect of things is something that I really gravitated towards in terms of the role playing. But I will say, if you're just starting out and you really just kind of want to understand how to just kind of get into it and then build on it as you go, as the years go by and you get better and better at it. Of course, practice is everything. But I would say to start with, imagine a character from one of your favorite shows or movies, like a villain that you really, you're really into this particular character. Then base an NPC on that particular character that you really like, and then try to act like that character. And then as you begin to do that, base all of your other NPCs on characters that you really enjoy from movies and television and things like that. That's one of the easiest ways, I think, to really start getting into the role playing aspect of things. And then from there, you can kind of modify them and based on what your players do and how they react and things like that. And I think that really starts to get you into learning how to role play and play a lot of varying characters.
Stace?
If I can just piggyback on that,
Sure.
like you piggybacked on mine, one of the probably the most successful GMing campaign that I ever ran personally was based on The Tempest by Shakespeare, and so I had that character of Prospero that I could use, and of course Caliban and all those guys. I already had a kind of a backstory built in. I just had to adjust their characters for how to react to what the characters did. It was really successful. It worked really well.
Well,
Yeah.
in my case, it's never something I have had too much trouble with in this. It was with NPCs, because I guess I get too interested in the NPCs anyway. But I think I forget who the author was, who says every character has an agenda. Every character wants something, even if it is only getting a drink of water. And you just say, I mean, those orcs are doing something. They have a life. They're not just standing around waiting for you to kill them. And it's pretty easy. You don't want to make them too interesting, which I sometimes do, and then people never get to hear their fun backstories. But why are they there? Money is always good because, you know, it says, I'm just doing the job. Or for that matter, I'm a tourist. I'm here in in this dungeon because I was on a 3-day package, or something. Or, you know, I mean, this is my home. I once ran really humorous. You know, people were rampaging through the cavemen, and it was their home, and they were protecting their children. And after a while, people started dropping their coins and say, "Here, take this. We're so sorry," and sneaking off. But I mean, just if you so long, they don't have to have full personalities, but they just have to have an agenda.
I think
And
Hunter and Paul wanted to go too.
one of the things that's really kind of helped me embody different characters in the world has been seeing what other people who are much better at doing GMing do with their campaigns. I oftentimes, like while I'm working, will listen to podcasts, and there's a number of podcasts where are actual play podcasts, like the Glass Cannon Network series of shows like Androids and Aliens, and you know, you've got your uh, Dungeons and Daddies, like if you're trying to go into more of a humorous side of thing. But all of these people that are playing these like really involved characters, especially the GMs, like they have a way of really giving life to those characters, and I think it's because a lot of them come from an acting background, and so by sort of seeing what works well in those campaigns and trying to emulate that, I've found varying degrees of success in my campaigns.
Yeah. You can also cast them from TV, assuming you're using humans. You know, and names, if you name them, it's good, because once you have a name, you begin to swirl around. For instance, in my next scenario, there is going to be an NPC called Ambrose Witherspoon. Now, you ask yourself, but you know, the thing is, somebody named Witherspoon, it implies certain things. But so, anyone else?
So I mean, like, everybody wants their campaign to look like our favorite bunch of nerdy ass voice actors, right? But like, my acting skills aren't there, and I'm decent at improv, but mostly just because I force myself and go to cons and practice, and you know, like it's not a comfortable space for me. I'm an introvert by nature, and so some of that stuff is really difficult to get into. What I have started doing as a tool for myself to sort of kickstart a character personality for an NPC is I just keep a list, and I don't use a GM screen really most of the time, but I keep a list kind of off to the side that has 3 columns on it, and it's race or species, depending on the game, and age and profession, and just a list in each of these columns of all the possible things. And when there's a new NPC that I haven't specifically mapped out, it's just a new random person they're encountering, you know, I will just drop 3 fingers on this sheet and look at where they land. And that combination of 3 elements is sort of the spark for the start of that NPC. And right next to that is a bunch of white space. So I will just jot down the name of the person and those 3 characteristics and where they ran into them, and then run with it as best I can and see if that character ever turns into something. But that way you kind of have, again, a starting point and a quick record of what that character is kind of like if you need to revisit them later.
Yeah, I think anything that you can do in terms of role playing to kind of take the stress off of yourself, you know, and everybody's got different methods for doing that, but just keep in mind that, you know, if you're having fun with it, chances are your players are having fun with it too, and that's really actually the most important part. There are a lot of tools and lots of things out there that, you know, certainly very, very helpful, but overall it's just, you know, just have fun, just have a really, really great time, because that's the most important thing.
Yeah. You always have the option of doing a little bit and then having you as narrator doing the heavy lifting, like you know, the princess is running around screaming and you know the princess is saying, come on now, you know, I'm in charge of this rescue or something, and just letting it go at that. I mean, because ultimately everyone is all eager to flex their own thews and do not want to spend too much time listening to the NPC. I have a question here. Somebody gave that seems ominous to me because it seems like somebody had a really bad experience. Is it important for GMs to get consent from players for activities that may traumatize the character or the player? That sounds to me, I've had, you know, I mean, that sounds like somebody really got bushwhacked. And I have several things to say, but I will not say them right now. Anyone else have any comments?
Go ahead, Hunter.
Okay. Yeah, Hunter, go ahead.
I was just going to say, a lot of the campaigns that I run have been very narrative based. And so it's kind of like we have one thing that leads to the next. And if there was something that a player didn't quite expect, then like I feel that at that point as a GM, I have failed in my ability to tell a coherent story that they're following. But for the most part, I try to make sure that they're able to like really kind of follow the action and understand like these are the subtleties that are happening in the world around you. And like after each session, we kind of have like a recap where we kind of talk about like what was your character feeling, what is this. And so if somebody at the end of that recap is kind of like thinking, oh well, this is I feel like we're moving towards a really, you know, positive note, and I know for sure that there's not a positive note in the future, like that's something I can take into account as far as like adjusting the next campaign or the next session rather to help direct that and keep them from just being gobsmacked by when things go south.
I had a situation in one campaign where two players were their characters. Let me back this up a little bit. They were married to different people, but their characters through the game developed an interest in each other. And because that was kind of getting into a little bit of a weird territory between role playing and real life, we actually decided to step completely out of character and have a meeting and say, okay, how do we want to handle this? And that way we were able to prevent getting to a point where somebody was freaked out or triggered by any kind of a cheating kind of a thing, something like that.
Chaz?
Yeah, that's that could be really interesting. I think that's why it's really important, and I know that Evil Bugle Games and there are other gaming companies as well that are getting on podcasts and videos and things like that and really stressing what we call a session zero, which is as you're starting a brand new campaign, you want to have a session where maybe people are just making their characters and things like that. And the GM and the players can talk about what kind of game that they want. Because different people throughout, especially when you're playing with people that you don't really know very well, they're coming from various things. Maybe you've met them at a convention where you guys have role played around a table, and then you're like, hey, I really like the way you guys play. I've got a couple of openings in my game. I'm starting a new campaign. You guys want to come along? And yeah, you get a whole bunch of new players and stuff. And a session zero is great for the GM to be able to explain to the players, this is the kind of game that I kind of enjoy running, or my games are a little bit more adult themed, or etc. And then everybody can talk back and forth and say, yeah, I'm cool with that, or no, I'm not really comfortable with that. Like obviously there are games where they're like, hey, in my world slavery is okay, and people take slaves all the time, and I would sit there as a player and go, I am not comfortable with that. So I mean, and it's good to be able to talk back and forth like that, especially if you have ladies in your game as well. It's really good to talk about, well, this is the kind of thing that goes on. Are you guys okay with that? Or would you guys like something different? Because as a GM, it's easy to tweak those kinds of things, tone things down or ramp certain things up. If people like, people are like, man, I play D&D with my kids all the time. I'm doing it for the last 4 years. I want to play with adults. I want adult themes. I want adult stuff. Then you can go, all right, great. I'll add more adult themed stuff in there. So that session 0 is a really good time to get everyone together and discuss, what it is. And sometimes you may find, and I'll stop after this, but I think sometimes you find it as a GM, not every player is going to be comfortable in your game, and that's okay. And it's okay for them to go, I get that you guys are all into this. That's not really the game for me. I'm out, and that's okay. And it's perfectly cool. Because you'll find that, and it's better to find out during session 0 than halfway through your campaign when you realize that someone's been upset for the last 6 months and just couldn't figure out a way to tell you.
Yeah, I mean, that is something that I think is so super valuable. I mean, when I was starting up my current campaign, which is Pulp Cthulhu, I was careful to tell people, okay, really, there are no potions to bring you back to life, no potions to give you another arm. You could die, you could be maimed. Are we sure about this? Of course, I'm such a kindly person. I try, it's no fun to kill characters, but if the rolls go really bad, however. But there is another incident that may be referring to this, this whole business about traumatizing. Many years ago, when dinosaurs ruled the earth, apparently there was an incident that a friend of mine had. She was going into just somebody else's campaign as a female character, and I got the impression that some of the other players thought it was fun for their characters to try to molest hers. And she likes to tell this story, but fortunately I had a magic jar spell. So I simply put my mind into one of theirs and then humiliated him. But I mean, and this, you just don't let people do things to each other unless they know ahead of time. Because in D&D, remember, if they really hate you, they can key your car. But yeah, I mean, yeah, session 0, so much a super idea, because once they know what you're going to do and have thought about it and raised their hand, then later on, yay. I mean, they're good with it. Or if they're not good with it, they keep their mouth shut, which is almost as good. Anyone else?
Yeah, I think, and this goes back to tools a little bit, right? Like, one of the most important tools in your toolbox as a game master and often as a player is communication, right? So not just session 0, which is not a bad idea at all, especially if you're playing with a group of people that is new to you and your game table. Establishing number 1, the norms for your table, and number 2, what is the intention of the campaign. Regular debriefs, especially if there's an intense session, at taking people and giving them 15 or 20 minutes to kind of decompress and talk about things before you really break and walk away from the table. It's just communication all the time. And this is both of my boys are starting to run games and play in games, and they're always asking things like, well, I don't know how to make this happen, but this is what I want to happen, thematically. And it's you need to sit down with your players and talk about that. This is the type of game I want to run. Is everybody okay with that? Now, that if you're at a table where you're very familiar with everybody, you've been playing together for 2 decades or whatever, that becomes less necessary in terms of prefacing things that are coming and making sure people are okay with it, because you start to understand what people are okay with. But even then, you still need to do things. I ran a sort of short-term heroes campaign using my new rule system, and there was this gotcha at the end that I spent months building up to. And it was a moment that I've been trying to work into a game for 30 years. because it had such like potential to really, really damage people, the players emotionally. You know, like I was trying to build to this moment where at the end of the campaign, or at least that leg of the campaign, there would be a definitive emotional and moral question that came up that would break the party. And it did when that moment came up, and there was like one session after that they got to deal with the ramifications of that. But you know, I knew because I'd been playing with that party a long time that I could get away with that moment and turning all of the players against one another, because I knew those people and I knew that we would work it out and they would find a way to come back afterwards. But that's not the sort of thing you can just do with a group of strangers. Like, you need to make sure that you've talked about that and what are you okay with, and you know, can I make a turn like that? And it's all about communication. You know, we took 20 minutes after that session to talk about it and make sure everybody was okay and that I hadn't just really screwed up, right? So yeah, talk always, constantly.
When you were going this build up, I was expecting you would say, and at the end they backed into it and screwed it all up, because that's what players do, right? But I wouldn't do that myself because I have tender-hearted people. But I mean, your results vary, and that's the way it goes. But yeah, I mean,
Chaz?
I think there are, I'm sorry, I just want to say, I think there may be DMs who feel this urge to, you know, set things up and say, ha, now I've got you. But we always have them. We always have them. Rocks fall, everybody dies isn't everyone's toolkit, but why use it? The idea is to have it set up. I'm going to pontificate here. You have all the rules. You created the setting. But what they have is they have the die rolls, and they have the rules that you set up for all of your world beater monsters, and you can't violate them. Yeah, I was running a monster in one time that I got from a book, and I realized later the most pitiful thing that I'd ever seen, that monster was terrible. I needed a 6-pack of them. But go on. So you have to give them, you can't push over the boundaries. But here I am. Yeah. Stace. Yeah, I'm good. I did.
Actually, Chaz was before me. Go ahead, Chaz.
Okay, Chaz.
Okay. Yeah, it's something that Paul was saying, and Dee, you were also, you kind of alluded to this too. Kind of one of the important things in terms of, you know, how to be a good GM. Try very hard, especially if you guys are pretty new to GMing. Try not to think of your gaming session as me versus them. If you can keep from doing that and understand that it's your job to set the scene and let them play an adventure in the world that you've created, and ultimately, and you don't have to, you know, you don't have to make this super easy for them, of course, but ultimately understand that the goal of the game is for the players to win. That is always going to be the ultimate goal, is that the players win. In my experience, and I'm sure these guys have experiences that are very similar. I have had experiences where I had a group of players that I play with for a very long time, and I set up a really big epic thing that if they didn't win, then the world would end, kind of thing. And I thought in my head this was awesome, but when they didn't win, when their dice rolls betrayed them, and they didn't win, and the bad guys won, and the world was basically over, they were really, really upset. And you know, that was a big learning experience for me. Luckily, those guys continued to play in my campaign after, when I started up a new campaign. But that was a really important lesson for me, in that, you know, make it difficult sometimes, sure, but ultimately the players are supposed to win. Stace?
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly where I was going with it. Back when I first started playing in the late 70s, I remember we would set it up to where we were kind of weird. We would have one person DMing and then another person running a party, as opposed to each person running a character. But it was very adversarial like that at first, because we didn't get it. We were young and we thought it was, you know, a game where you fight against each other. And it took us a long time to realize that there should be the threat of death, or if a character makes a dumb mistake, there should be the possibility of them dying, or if they just play the character in such a way that you just can't avoid just playing it out, then yeah, they can die. But that threat should be there, but it shouldn't be a foregone conclusion, and it shouldn't be an adversarial relationship. Like Chaz says, the whole point is for the characters to be able, and the players to be able to win, and to be able to feel good, and to build a companionship, and that doesn't happen if they're in an adversarial relationship with the DM.
Right.
Paul?
Hunter? Paul? Yeah.
Whichever. I just like the one thing I would add is, like, as part of that communication, first of all, there's absolutely nothing wrong with a funhouse dungeon situation, right? Like, if all the players get together and they're like, hey man, we just want to kick down doors and kill monsters and loot treasure, and in that situation, we expect every turn to potentially be deadly, right? Like, if you go in with that understanding and that's what people want, then 100% high lethality, all that fun stuff. But the other side of that is absolutely, yes, make sure that everybody is having a good time. You know, I see my role ultimately as a steward of the player's story. And yes, it's in my world, and yes, I'm trying to do things politically, sociologically, whatever, in my campaign, because I need to have fun too. But the ultimate goal is that it is a group storytelling experience, and it should never, in those normal situations that aren't what I already mentioned previously, it should never be about you versus them. It should never be adversarial. It should be an uplifting experience ultimately, right?
Hunter?
Um, I just kind of like, as we've all been talking about this, it jogged a memory of where I had a negative kind of situation where when I first started DMing, I was following the source material pretty closely. And that source material went into a place where one of my players was like really kind of triggered by that, and that was difficult for her, like to the point where she was almost ready to leave the game after basically dropping that sort of controversial source material, like at the end of the session. It was kind of like, and here's the thing, and she was not okay with that, and it was worrisome for me as a GM. Like, oh, I did not mean to tread on that. On like, if this is something that is, you know, that important to you and whatnot, like I do not want that to be an end all thing. And I was just following the orders of the original source material, but as we've learned, like saying I was just following orders is not a good justification for anything. So at this point, or I was able to easily kind of like retroactively change the nature of the encounter, and like talk to the whole group about, like, this is why we're changing this, not specifically calling out that player, but just saying like, this is an uncomfortable thing and we need to make sure that we're all comfortable at the table. So this is why we're making this change. It shouldn't affect any of the other like aspects of this campaign, but just, it was a real learning moment for me, understanding that I can not have to follow the campaign setting and all of its little intricacies if it made my players uncomfortable. Like, yeah.
Okay, I think we have a little less than 20 minutes now. One thing, one little cute thing I wanted to say. Okay, you create your dungeon or your scenario, and it seems to me if you say you have the players, they're out to win. The NPCs are out to win. You handle background. And you say, okay, the NPCs will want to do these things, so they do them, but you don't get invested in that because that's not your job anymore. If you see what I mean? Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Looks like we have one more question here too.
Yes.
Go ahead. It's in the question and answers.
Yes. We have one question here from Kevin Taylor. How do you deal with players who consistently cheat and or min-max characters, like, I guess, power gamers? If I could add a little bit.
So from my perspective, number one, I've never viewed min-maxing as a bad or toxic thing under most circumstances. Gamers are always going to be gamers, and you're always going to have gamers in your group that are going to try and maximize the rules, right? In fact, it's valuable for testing. Like, I do a lot of game design and development, and having a table full of min-maxers is freaking fantastic for finding rule breaks and balance issues. However, if I have somebody in a game that is not just testing and it's meant to be serious storytelling, that's the sort of person that I will, number one, take aside the min-maxer and say, look, you are building a one-trick pony. It is going to be awesome when it's your moment, but there are going to be a lot of times when it's not your moment, and you may be bored, you may be feeling frustrated because you can't do things. Is this a road you want to go down? And if so, I'll try to accommodate your moment from time to time, but you're going to have a lot of downtime. In terms of people who cheat, that's communication again, and that's one-on-one. Like, these are facilitation and management skills. And it's shocking how often these real life work skills translate into this pastime that we have. But yeah, you need to take those people aside one-on-one and say, look, man, or person, this is not something that's going to stand at the table. And we need to correct this behavior, or maybe you need to find a different game because it's affecting other people at the table negatively.
I'll throw in really quick to what Paul said. That's a lot of that's very true. As a GM, I have a hard time with power gamers. So I generally try not to have people who are very much into power gaming at my tables, because for the most part, they're going to be kind of bored because I role play a lot and the players around my table role play quite a bit. And role playing and power gaming, because stats don't really enter into the role playing aspect as much, so they generally tend to get bored and toddle off. As far as the cheating goes, on the other hand, there was something that I learned fairly recently that I find very, very good advice, which I didn't know about beforehand, but I think it's really important. Is that you praise publicly, you punish privately. If there's a player at your table that is cheating, absolutely take them aside. Some other time when you're not gaming or whatever, take them aside and say, hey, I've noticed you've been fudging a lot of rolls. I would really like for you to stop, or I'm going to need you to find a different game to play, and just let them know, but definitely take them aside. You don't want to embarrass them publicly, because then it turns into a whole big thing and drama and bloodshed and all kinds of stuff. So definitely praise publicly, punish privately.
To follow up on what Chaz says there, that's a central tenet of good management strategy too, is to praise your team publicly, give credit to your team, but to when there are problems to handle it privately. But in going with that, a good example of what doesn't work very well is early on when I was gaming, we had one power player in the group who he would try to exploit every possible loophole, and by doing so, he got magic items for his character, and he got the GM to kind of bend on a couple of things that he probably shouldn't have, and so the DM wound up in a situation where he was no longer in control of the character. And so what he tried to do to resolve that was he enlisted me to have my character get into conflict with the other character. And so we basically had a PvP kind of a session. It did not work very well. It didn't do what he had intended. It didn't take the other guy down a notch. He wound up leaving the group. The other guy did. It wasn't the right way to handle it. I think communication, like Paul was saying, is the way to go. It's the smart way to go.
All I can say is, if I'm trying to figure out where having min-maxers are actually fun to have in a campaign.
And playing Munchkin.
Yeah.
Or a funhouse dungeon.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, you can say, this is all very good for your min-maxing, but you have to understand that the next leg is all going to be all be aquatic, and you don't have any boating, and you certainly don't have any deep sea diving. Too bad. But oh, this is apropos of nothing, but I just wanted to say something that I have always found very successful if I'm starting a new campaign, and either it's new people or people who do not like to read the rule books a whole lot, is I create maybe a dozen, bare bones characters with, their occupation, some of their skills and so forth, and a few their stats, and say, pick any of these and then fluff it up. And sometimes this makes it easier for people. And, other people would say, don't you touch my character sheet. But I've never had one. They say, thank God, just give me one of those.
Well, yeah, if you're trying to encourage role playing instead of role playing, right?
There is a difference.
Yeah, exactly. One of the things that I've fallen on just in the last couple of years, and this is a nonstop quest, right? Like, I've been working for 35 years to try and be a better GM. And just in the last few years, I fell upon this concept of don't call for a roll unless the outcome of failure is at least as interesting as the outcome of success. So a lot of times you're going to have players that they're trying to roll all the time. I make a perception check. I make a perception check. I search for traps. I search for, detect magic, whatever. And if you're not calling for rolls, don't accept rolls, first of all. I don't know why you rolled perception right there, because we're going to talk about what you guys see. Just make it worthwhile and interesting to the group, no matter what the outcome of the roll is going to be. And that in itself starts to really encourage people to engage in the story, listen to the descriptions, ask exploratory questions. You increase the amount of back and forth engagement and take a little bit of that role playing out of the role play session.
Or as I put it recently to one of my characters, as long as I'm letting you do something, you never ask the DM if you need to roll. Because what can that mean? It means that you can roll and not be able to do it.
Yep. In terms of character, here's another tool. So if you have folks that are new and they're just starting to try and figure out what it is to role play, there's a YouTuber that I watch, Ginni. She's actually here in Colorado. Ginny D. She's a cosplayer, but she's also just in the last couple of years gotten into gaming and running games. And she's doing a series right now of interactive, like, character interview sessions. And she's got one that she's role playing on screen as a healer, and the other one is like as an evil tiefling mob boss who's looking for underlings. And she asks all these sort of exploratory questions and then pauses in the video for you as the player to answer the question. And the whole point of this series is to help players sort of explore and discover who their character is and what they're about. And so that's a really interesting way for people that might be new to role-playing to dive into, well, what sorts of things are important for a character to have sort of about themselves. Please.
Well, Hunter.
Oh, so when I started a campaign recently, all of the players at the table had never really done role-playing games before. And one of the things that I wanted to do to really help them get into the nature of the character, because the setting takes place in the 1980s and they play as children, so it's kind of like a Stranger Things-esque setting, is I sent everybody to their physical mailing address enrollment forms for their school, which then all of the information that they filled out on those forms plugged directly into their character sheets. So by and there was a letter from the principal, that kind of helped set up the world. And so by kind of giving the characters this very visceral token from the game world and kind of breaching into the real world. It allowed them to sort of explore that space. And of course, like I was in communication with them, like talking over text and in person, saying like, oh, this is the kind of person that you're building? Does that seem like something that you want to pursue over the course of this campaign? And but having that initial sort of like, wait, what? I don't know anybody who comes, or I don't know anybody from, where is it, Nevada, the school board in Nevada. Why am I getting this? So it was it just kind of having fun ways to really bring the world into their world was fun.
There are a couple of things one thing that really helps when it's a new person, and I was involved in starting this up, but really they ran with it. One person, the first campaign, and the player was playing a professor of chivalry. If you have ever seen Dr. Detroit, but everything the character would also say, what is the chivalrous thing to do? And in my current campaign, one of the players was a World War I combat nurse. And in any case, she'll also say, where's the patient? Where's the wounded? And nothing matters more to her than seeing to it that the wounded are taken care of. And I said to a friend, well, Hot Lips Houlihan wouldn't do that in a combat situation. And my friend said, no, she did. So that makes it easy. You look at it in terms of your avocation or your profession or your ethic. And then after that, you can slowly grow.
Cool. I think we have one last question in the Q&A.
Yes, we do. Brian asks how to draw out players who hang back. How do you draw out the shy player, the player that hangs back, I guess?
Let's choose Stace first, because he's been hanging back this whole time.
Well, one thing that helps with that I found is that if the GM goes to each individual player and finds out what kind of goals they would like to have for their characters, and then builds something into the campaign that gives an opportunity for those characters to meet those goals. That's one way to get a character involved and to have, and for the player to start being more interactive in the campaign.
I when I have a character or players that like to sort of, maybe they're new to it and they're kind of worried about being open to the experience, or like they see somebody else who's like more into it than they are, and they're kind of worried about that. There's that anxiety in them. One of the things that I like to do is create a small scene with them, specifically between them and an NPC. Like, it's an actual conversation between them and like the barkeep, or a conversation between them and somebody who's close to them. And by like engaging with them personally, but through the nature of the game world, there's no roles involved, there's none of that. It's basically just saying like, look, we're here together now, and I'm being vulnerable in the way that I'm presenting myself as a character. It's okay for you to be the same. I find that like engaging them on that personal level kind of helps bring them into the fold. And then when there is an opportunity as a group for them to be more vocal or more active, that definitely helps them feel like they have the ability to do so.
Cool. Yeah,
Guys,
I'll be really really brief. One and I understand too that sometimes it's hard for players who are a little bit more shy or who aren't as confident in their role playing, especially when you have other players at the table who are a lot more boisterous, a lot more outgoing, because they generally tend to kind of hijack every scene. And it's tough. As a GM, one of the things that you can do, you definitely want to encourage the role playing. But one thing you can do is you can always go around the table every time you have the chance to be able to say, okay, what are you doing right now? Well, I'm going to talk to this person, blah, blah, blah. You let them do their thing. And then you go to the next person. How about you? What are you up to? While he's doing that, or while she's doing that, what are you doing? And when you go around the table and everybody understands that they're going to have a chance to have that spotlight on them, even if it's brief, then players don't necessarily feel the need to always have to hijack and get attention, because they know that attention will find them in turn with everybody else. Everybody gets an equal chance at the spotlight. And when you set up that kind of scenario, I think you find that players aren't as greedy, and they are a lot more giving for other people to have the spotlight and the stage for a bit too.
And for those players that don't like to have the spotlight, that might be kind of, you know, stepping back and reclusive a little bit. I don't remember where I was going with that.
Oh, one quick question, Matthew. Where can we find these little notes? Or will there be any little notes that will be available after?
He's been making notes in Discord.
I've been making notes in the Discord and in the Pandora room. There's quite a few links of tools and things, as well as a few YouTubers and.
How can you find that?
How can you find that? Go into the MileHiCon website and click on a link to the Discord channel. So Discord is a chat channel. And
found ours.
How can they find?
If I
your
was
links.
later,
All of the panelists and stuff have. It should. Well, there's nothing to do that I can do permanently right now. I could talk to somebody about that.
Okay.
And maybe
you have my email address. If you want to email me and give me that information later, it will be fine. Or for all of us, yes, can't hurt,
Sure.
right? Okay.
Yeah.
Sure.
Hey, so thanks guys. This has been really, really super fun and very informative actually. I've learned a lot, so I appreciate your time.
Yeah. I'm thrilled. None of my cats came in and upstaged me. Yeah, thanks a lot. Thanks a lot, everybody.
And hey guys, if there are questions or anything, I think we all have email addresses. We're all trying to be very approachable. Feel free to contact outside of con.
I believe all the panelists have their information up on the website if they've submitted that.
Probably.
Akin to that.
I'd like to stress one last thing. This is a golden era for virtual gaming. I started my group, and in January I said, well, is everyone available for Saturday night? And they said, yeah. Think of it. They were all available on Saturday night. So game virtually. It's one of the few things. It's the golden age of virtual gaming.
Indeed. Thanks, everybody.
Right.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys.
Thanks so much for everyone. I hope I wasn't too mouthy here.
You're great, Dee.
Right.
Take care, guys. Thanks again.
Have a good con.
Yeah. Good con, everyone.